Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to the Kansas Cybersecurity Task Force Workforce Development and Education Subcommittee. I am Secretary D'Angela Burns-Wallace and the subcommittee chair. This is our final subcommittee meeting before we gather as a full task force to discuss the recommendations for the final report. So thank everyone for joining. Senator Pittman is with JCIT today. I'll be joining him later today in that capacity to present to them on various things, and we'll be sharing some of the work of the task force. So he won't be able to join us this morning, but I would like to welcome Trent Armbrust first, from the Department of Commerce, who's joining us. If you all remember, Trent joined us a few weeks back and was sharing some of the work that really came together with what we were looking at. And we asked him to join us this morning as a thought partner, as we kind of think about prioritizing the recommendations, thinking about where our gaps are, and think about how we can make recommendations that build on complementary work or parallel work that is happening, like the work that was done earlier that Trent has shared with us. And so we thought he'd be a great thought partner this morning as we kind of put our final thoughts together. So we've talked about the importance of prioritizing our recommendations that we have to date, what's critical, what's of high importance in order of things, and how do they fall in place. And we have feedback from some of our members on their priorities that may or may not have been able to be a part of the conversation. And so we'll want to open it up to the group, and we'll kind of go over some of that first. And then we'll open it up to a kind of a larger discussion. We also have feedback for some clarifying some of our recommendations, and we'll talk through some of those as we go through. And then, as always, we want to make sure we kind of round out our conversation are there any gaps? Is there anything kind of that's missing, right? And so I'm going to ask Ali to share. And so just to kind of get us started, and please know this is a discussion. This is some of the initial feedback and just trying to get us a place of, how to organize our conversation, and some of the ones that we already have. Of all of them, it looks like, and Ali, I don't know if you want to talk through it because I know you helped to put this together from the feedback that you got from the various members.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So what I have here, we have our common recommendations up top, the near term, and then from there on down, we have our workforce development and education recommendations, and these are all from the interim report. And so the homework assignment that we had asked from members is to go through those recommendations and using a scale that Jeff Maxson had put together, identify what they thought was critical and what was of high priority. So of the feedback that I've received so far, we had 5 of our recommendations, including some of the common near-term recommendations listed. We have 5 listed as critical and then 6 listed as high. So I have all of the recommendations here. You'll see that some of them don't necessarily have that definition next to them because they didn't identify them as critical or high. And so this is just kind of the starting point for the conversation for now, just kind of see what everybody's thoughts are and if there's anything we might want to add to that definition list.
Since I'm late to the conversation, could we distinguish between what critical is and what high?
Yes. Jeff, can you walk through the prioritization definitions that we used with the group?
Yeah, so we narrowed it down to 2. And so critical is basically recommendations that are critical to success for other recommendations or kind of critical path recommendations. And that if there's limited resources, these are kind of the must-haves that will have the greatest impacts. And then high recommendations are ones that will have significant impacts to efforts as a whole. So really just kind of the 2. So based on resource constraints and critical path.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay.
All right. So what I'd like to do, Ali, scroll down for me just a little bit. I want to make sure I'm okay, good. Okay, come back up for me. All right. So I'd like to just like spend a little time walking through these and seeing where they currently land, seeing if there's others that, and understanding that if something isn't marked critical or high, it does not mean that we're taking it out or anything of that nature. What we're trying to do in the final report is to give some prioritization to the varying, kind of growing list of recommendations, and in a way that helps to signal where some, as opportunities are taken, as first steps are taken, as dollars are allocated, where the potential is to have the greatest impact, or where it is essential that there's investment for us to truly hit or move towards or advance the idea of the whole of state, and starting to get this work foundationally done. So what I'd like to do is there are the common recommendations, which are those first four. I'd like to tackle those first, and then we can begin to walk through the ones that are specific to our workforce. From the feedback that we've received so far from this group, if we look across those first four recommendations, it looks like we identified or most lean towards the 3 of the 4 being critical and 1 being high, which makes sense because those are the common recommendation that we all feel that are critical to the rest of our recommendations, or that our recommendations will build upon. So what I'd ask, Allie, can you make it a little bigger? Right there. All right. So if we take a moment and focus on common recommendations 1, 2, 3, and 4, I'll give you guys a minute to reread those and look at the level at which we are recommending, and then I'll open it up. So across those 4 recommendations, does anybody feel that something needs to be shifted in terms of either critical or high, and or that designation removed from any of those 4?
So when I put my thoughts together in this, I labeled near term 3 as high because some of that is already kind of organically happening, but I can see it as not knowing what we don't know unless we do some sort of assessment and things like that. So I could see it leaning towards the critical space, but seeing that some of it is already organically happening through this effort, et cetera, is why I kind of labeled it high. But I think that definitely could be critical as well.
Any others? Go ahead. Is that Trent?
Yeah, I was going to echo what Jeff just said. I kind of look at that one and I think about how that would inform some of our decisions in the workforce development and some other areas. So I'm wondering if that doesn't need to go. I mean, everything can't be critical, so I understand the prioritization, but I wonder if that would give us a high level overview of our posture and where we need to focus efforts. So just.
No, I think I probably maybe leaned a little bit with you. And yep, you're right. Everything can't be critical. The one thing about these top 4 is that these are the common recommendations. So this means that these are the ones that various work groups kind of raised their hand and said, we all came up with almost something very similar. So all of these sitting in the critical space almost makes sense because multiple groups brought these ideas forward to say these were the core things. And I think I lean towards that high/critical because I feel I'm that person that loves a landscape analysis, because I really do think sometimes otherwise we can spin our wheels or not as effectively or efficiently utilize our resources. if we don't understand what's already there and we work to leverage and maximize what's there and truly then focus on gaps, right? And so I see some of these other places where I see, like the first one says, assess all existing cybersecurity contracts and identify existing gaps in services and solutions, right? And we say that's critical. Well, how do we know where our gaps are in the different types of contracts unless we know where some of the work needs to be done or needs to be overlaid? And so those contracts that we stand up in those master's agreements are designed to provide services and resources that are needed by political subdivisions. And so if we don't understand what's needed, how do we, draft appropriate contracts? So I think I lean in that direction too. That makes sense. So, any other thoughts on the common ones before we start to move more into our workforce development ones? All right. Hearing none, let's start to move through our workforce development. Now, Allie, remind us the lettering, the kind of system we were using in the report, the WDE N1 versus WDE L1. Remind us of what that means. And I don't know if Trent is as familiar with the report as the rest of us. So
sure. So the WDE is the shorthand for the Workforce Development and Education Subcommittee. And then N1 in this case is for near-term recommendations. And as we move further down, you're going to see L2. You should see a few on the screen right now, and that's for the long-term recommendations. And that's how we initially formatted the interim report. That way we could look at it as, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe near-term was anything 6 months or less that could be implemented or work that we could begin. And long-term was anything 6 months and beyond.
Yes, you're correct.
Right. And the good thing here, sometimes when people hear near term or long term and they think, oh, the stuff that we can do in 6 months, and that must be the stuff that all gets tagged critical. Well, I'm glad in that grouping, we didn't hit them all as high and critical. Some of them can be executed in a short amount of time. And so they could be near-term goals that could be done. But when we start to prioritize, they may not necessarily need to be the first thing done, right? And then in the long term, there are some that are critical and high that couldn't be implemented immediately, but we need to start working on them immediately for them to come to fruition, to be ready to stand up X, Y, and Z. So I just say that because in some ways it could feel almost counterproductive, like, oh, we've already said these are near term and long term. But even within that kind of, structure, there are still those that have real prioritization within the near and some prioritization within the long. So that said, what I'd like for us to do again here is going to get tougher when we move into the long-term group, but in the near-term group, we also have another set of 4, N1, N2, N3, and N4. Let's focus on those and let's talk through those around this high and critical. And you can see that some of them don't have either designation, which is okay. I'll give you a minute, read through, again, refresh yourself with N1 through N4, and then we'll open it up again for discussion. All right. Tell me your thoughts.
This is Trent. I'll jump in. N1 and N2 are perfectly aligned with the work that the Advantage Kansas Coordinating Council is doing. We just had a conversation yesterday, matter of fact, that it's almost like verbatim what we were writing are N1 and N2. And so I think we know clearly if 2 groups have come to this conclusion, then these are noted as high priority or critical steps that we need to take in the state of Kansas. Understanding that computer science curriculum. We've done some work where we reached out to like CompTIA and said, how many certificates have you issued in the state of Kansas and in what areas? So we can get that type of data. I think our challenge has been getting that data. And then also some schools define computer science different than others. So some commonality of definition would be helpful, but again, fully in alignment with N1 and N2. And I know I'm working with the 3 engineering schools right now as we look at the University Engineering Initiative Act on the renewal of that, and it has been renewed, but now we're starting to move into that, what are we actually going to do with the money phase of discussion? And so I think this work of this committee, as well as the Advantage Kansas Committee, will help inform some of those discussions as we talk with our Regents institutions. And then we're happy to see that I think it was Barton County announced that they were going to start a new cybersecurity training program. If I have that correct, I'll have to look that up. But also we know that several of the institutions across the state are prioritizing cybersecurity.
Not to dilute the process, but the challenge that we're going to have is you may be training cybersecurity here in the state of Kansas, and then they graduate and go to work for Google. They might sit in the state of Kansas, but they're working for Google in Washington. As you think about remote work options, those exist. They're going to continue to exist. I'm not sure how we try and collect the data around, that trying to keep those. I mean, that's been an issue in Wichita is trying to keep, those kids here. Or does that matter, right? Do we care? Because just like Google can look to Kansas for talent, we can look other places for talent as well. So it kind of makes it, I think, a little more challenging in this particular sector on how we view it and how we address it.
Michael,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Secretary.
No, you go ahead, Trent.
That same question has come up at all of our discussions about that retention of talent in Kansas, and it is a really tough subject. Some of it is the salary. We know that the salaries that are paid in the state of Kansas are below our peers across the board in all industries. And so some of that is, reframing the way we think about compensating the workforce in Kansas. And then the other part that we've had the discussions on about specifically the work-based learning is that a lot of students know the name Google, but they don't know some of the opportunities that exist in Kansas because they're less well-known names. And so we're hoping that one of the strategies that could work in this would be that internship or that work-based learning opportunities would expose Kansas companies to the talent that we are training so they understand the full breadth of opportunity in Kansas for careers in computer science and cybersecurity. But agree, we're going to have students leave, but we also have the opportunity, as you noted, to recruit talent into the state from other areas.
And I do think as we move into some of our long-term recommendations, I think we gave a nod to some of that, and it may be thinking about just, making that connection, right? As we're doing some of this work in the short term, how do we link it to more longer term goals of retention, right? Yep. So as you build the capacities in computer science and cybersecurity workforce development and the educational capabilities, how do we work that on the front end in the short term, but connect that to long-term goals and then standing up opportunities that entice, those coming out of those programs, or while they're in those programs, connecting them into needed areas, in the state, both public and private. So like while they're going through those educational opportunities, they're being exposed to the depth and breadth in Kansas. And so even though that sometimes we still might be under market. Now there's a different level of affinity or an understanding of what's locally available. So, and I don't know if that's a tweak of a recommendation. I don't know if that's, just partially tying them together or writing, adding in a way. I just think that we have to almost connect the dots, right? Like we got to do this front end work because we do need to grow this educational capacity, to train up and to grow that pipeline. But we also have to have a piece of intentionality with it that then pulls it to and through and creates opportunities that both benefit those coming through that pipeline for, in terms of exposure, but also have the potential benefit to, help us deal with gaps in the in-between. We've talked of, both Mike and Doug, you both, talked about some of the needs out in, the local areas and the more, rural areas where they don't have larger teams, right? So again, how, connecting these dots of as we expand certain programs, as we invest in certain programs, are there ways to leverage that to also help us in interim ways fill those gaps? So making more of that connectivity between our short-term and our long-term recommendations there, or more intentionality maybe between them.
Yeah, and I guess the answer where I was going with that is, we're doing some of that now, and we've been doing it. We've been doing it for a couple of years. So I'm just not really sure if we want to put that as a long term, because I almost think that it, as you develop that talent pipeline, you're developing it through some of these partnerships and through some of these internships and those types of things. So I guess my question would be, is it really, do we segment it off? And even if we do segment it off, should it really be a long-term, or to keep that talent here, should we integrate it into short-term pipeline development, because that's part of the development process, I think.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like trying to give more of a near-term, more immediacy to tagging into and developing that pipeline and doubling down or reinvesting in it because of the retention of talent issues. May think about, or thank you, Ali, for capturing it for now, and we may come back to it and come back to language. Or as we walk through the long-term goals, we might see one that we decide maybe we want to tweak and pull up into that near term that helps to address that. But let's go ahead, Jeff.
And I really think there might be just kind of a handful of, as you tear this one apart, it kind of maybe might morph into a set of 3 or 4 separate recommendations. Obviously, this one is just establishing the partnerships. Bigger picture, obviously developing the talent pipeline, but the near term goal of establishing the partnerships, we can definitely get that in place in 6 months. But fully developing the talent pipeline and then addressing the retention issues, those are definitely more long term. I think might be actually 2 separate recommendations.
But there may be, and not necessarily developing the talent pipeline, but leveraging into the existing pipeline faster, like more immediately, right? Because there's one thing to build the partnerships and to continue to help support and infuse as programs are expanded. There's another thing of who's currently in those programs right now and where is their current need, and how do we leverage into what is currently available in an intentional way that maybe we haven't been doing or doing more of, or putting more of a spotlight on, or putting more resources to help address more immediate needs. So I think it's a and both, not necessarily an or, in my mind. Yeah.
And just for your all information, I think I said this last time, but the Department of Commerce got an apprenticeship grant, and we just did some of the awards for intermediaries. And one of the awards that we gave out was to the Casey Tech Council for their Apprenti program. And Apprenti is apprenticeship programs in computer science. And the goal of that grant is to take what they've already built in the Kansas City market and now roll that apprentice program out statewide. And so we're intentionally building internships in the computer science space, or I'm sorry, apprenticeships in the computer science space, which is new for the state of Kansas, which will obviously, that's a tactical thing, but that will feed into the success of this near-term goal or long-term, however we put it, but building that talent pipeline through work-based learning.
Yeah, and I was about ready to say, we may be surprised how many people are already doing this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just that we don't know about it, and they're doing it locally.
And that is the piece that I think is the power of, like, okay, the in one, we talk about like this, like that, an assessment or a landscape, but we're really focused there on, well, the way it reads, it's almost like the educational capabilities. But what we're just talking about here, like, these are the things that we need to be finding in that landscape analysis as well, right? These both opportunities like that Mike has described as well as Trent has described, because the power of the first recommendation is once we have these identified, and to Mike's point, there might be, you know, many out there that are doing it. We don't know about it and it's local. What the whole point of being able to do the assessment or that landscape analysis is, all right, now, is there a way that we can amplify them, right? Is there a way that we can get those that are doing this more talent in more places because X, Y, and Z institution across the state didn't know that this county was doing this, but they have students that could map onto it. They just weren't aware, and that county didn't, you know, think or didn't have a relationship to reach out to X, Y, and Z institution, you know, even though that they're doing it, right?
And D'Angelo, I think that's why if Ali, if you could scroll back up to the top, to the previous ones, the, which one was it? Not the landscape analysis, but the number N4, which building those formal relationships with, and I call that the network, building the network, is because I think that's where a lot of this information can be shared of what everyone's doing already.
Yeah.
And that network's gonna be really important because we just don't, I think to Mike's point, we don't know what everyone's doing in this space. And to be able to pull that together and leverage that and tell that story, that's going to help us attract and keep talent in cybersecurity as well as businesses. So from an economic development standpoint, I view that network as critical. So we don't duplicate efforts.
That's actually one of the points that the local school district here wanted me to kind of reiterate, is the shared resources and also raise awareness of how we share those resources, whether that's some sort of registry or however that is to communicate that stuff out. But that was one of the topics that they really thought would be beneficial, especially for, you know, Southwest or the smaller areas in Kansas.
I like that. So there was two threads I want to pull on there. As Doug mentioned, you know, capturing that idea of, you know, in this, that shared resource and, you know, that operationalizing of how you raise that awareness of those. You know, it does start with building the networks and making the connections, and then it moves into, you know, how do we make it actionable and actually leverage it, which then pulls on Trent's thread. I think as we think about refining or, you know, refining some of our recommendations in and around some of the recommendations we made for assessments or landscape analysis, whether it's in the common part or even in our own, there's an important piece that I don't want us to lose. Trent said, you know, once we have that landscape analysis, how, you know, we pull it together. How do we pull then, you know, the entities together? How do we leverage that information? How do we tell the story, you know, and then, you know, assess it for next steps of action, right? I think we almost imply that, but I don't know if we say it, right? I think when we're in each of these recommendations, we talk about these, you know, assessments or these landscape analysis or understanding, you know, what's going on in the current way. I think it's almost, we are implying like, as we do that, then we'll use it in this way. I think we want to make sure as we go through our recs overall in this report that we are being conscious of not just implying then that'll be used in X, Y, and Z way, but almost pulling this thread as Trent, mentioned, like, and then in building on Doug's, like this idea of like, you can pull it together, but then we have to leverage it. We have to be able to raise awareness of where the resources are and how you access them and things of that nature. We have to tell the story differently around what's available and figure out what's actionable, right? Versus what is truly about, connection and collaboration, or addition to action, So I don't know. Those are a couple of things that came to mind as people were sharing.
That's a really good point. Out here, a lot of times it feels like the major entities are competing in the job market. We have a college here, we have the school district, we have the county's head office. We're all competing for employees when really there needs to be a way for us to work together to share those resources that are here and try to bring new resources into the area instead of us just competing for what is available.
That's an excellent point. And it goes back to the basics of cluster development around industries, and why things like the animal health corridor work is that you bring everyone together, and even though they're competing for talent, they're competing in the marketplace, they all know when they work together, the bounty is much larger, and everyone shares in that. So great point.
Slide us back down, Allie. I know we're hopping around. You're doing great capturing our various thoughts.
So is this
Let me
kind
know
of
if
one,
there's anything. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
is this kind of the one on the N1? We kind of do the same as high/critical, as well as we kind of keep pulling on that thread.
Yeah. I think so.
I think it's important because it goes back to that whole idea of understanding the landscape and understanding where our gaps are. And if we simply don't have the training programs there to develop the workforce, and we know there's a workforce demand of, say, 1,000 a year, and we're only training 500 a year, that's a significant issue and push for us then.
And to Mike's point, 400 of those 500 are leaving the state.
Right. Yeah. I mean, how many? Yeah. Are we making any progress on that gap? And if not, then we're gonna have to change our tactics. And it'll focus our investments.
I think, and I know we're kind of walking through them, and I think while we're here, I want to poke a little bit at, as we talk about some fine tuning, not just prioritization, like N3 and N4. Feel like things we want and need to do and can do in ways in the short term, but they also feel a little generic. I don't know if we want to think about tweaking or refining them a little bit, or tying them to something else while we're looking at this group in the near term. Any thoughts?
Well, D'Angelo, I kind of had that same, I don't quite know how to verbalize it, but I had that same thought. I kept looking at those thinking, okay, but what does that really
mean? Yeah.
More remote work options. Well, of course. I mean, that's I just, I mean, if we're talking about outside the state, but I think it's, it's important for us to think, it comes down to the data, as Trent indicated, right? What's the data tell us? And then, use that data to understand, we either have to create more talent in the state, or do we go outside and look for, right, somebody to work in the state that's not in the state? But yeah, I had that same. And then on the learning management, I was like, okay, but is that the only way to train staff. I mean, there's multiple ways to accomplish that. I don't know. That was, to me, almost too specific.
Specific, yeah, like generic but specific at the same time. It's like,
Yeah, but anyway, yeah, I kind of had that same. I kept thinking, okay, if those were just gone, would that really matter?
yeah,
And to me, I'm saying no, but I don't know how everyone else feels about it.
I just had a quick thought. The N3 explore remote work options, that almost needs to be part of like the job description, because that's not something as a whole, but it could very well be part of a job description to further the pool for that position. But yeah, it seems very vague just to have that sentence here in this document.
yeah. I think, again, it's one of those spaces, particularly in 3, a lot of what we're recommending is to accomplish this, right? To understand and see how we can create more remote work options that attracts new talent, as Mike was saying, and so I guess I'm leaning in that way of it might need to go away, or the essence of it incorporated, as Doug is mentioning, somewhere else, or as a part of our, I don't know. Oh wait, sorry, Allie, hold on. There's a this is a thought, and I know as we continue to work through the organization of the report, but this to me lends itself almost to an overarching tenet of what we're trying to accomplish with the recommendations in the workforce development area, right? And I have to look at how we've, crafted the report, but it's almost, all of these recommendations are, they flow towards us trying to accomplish 2 or 3 major things. And these are some of the ways that we do that, right? And so it almost feels like you pull it up as not as an actual recommendation, particularly that N3 type of language, but like that concept that we were just talking about of, this talent pool and this remote work and being competitive internally, externally, nationally, is one of the tenets where we believe we need to strive for in whole of state around workforce development. Now, these recommendations help us begin to get to that. So maybe there's a section that's created, for each area that talks briefly about what is our kind of overarching goals or overarching tenet of what our recommendations are trying to do. Just a thought.
So would it make sense, kind of pulling some of the others is just that effort to develop ways to attract talent to the state of Kansas, and then just list that as part of, so when we put the report together, we have some kind of clarifying remarks for each one, but kind of make that more broad, include this as kind of one of the mechanisms to do that in terms of attracting talent as part of a deliberate approach.
Maybe. I just think I think it's not a good standalone recommendation. 2, I think it's what many of our recommendations are striving to help us achieve. And so it kind of crosses a lot of different things and wanting to see that be a type of outcome, right? And can help us get to that outcome. But I don't know that it's a standalone operational recommendation. It is, that one in particular is just so broad and generic. It is much more of that high level goal versus a recommendation.
Yeah, D'Angelo, I got tasked with coming up with on the strategic side for this committee, and I kept coming back to the idea that there's 2 pieces to this. One is training the folks that are doing cybersecurity today, right? So all those, don't open that email, don't all that stuff.
Mhm.
And then it's the educational part, right, which goes from K through 12 through adulthood. And how do you create that next gen of practitioners?
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, that's really, you've got those, to me, you've got those very high level two pieces that we address in this committee, or that you guys address in this committee.
Mhm. Right. And everything flows from that, right?
Yeah. And so to me, it's kind of, does it fit? Because sometimes we start getting into, like, when we're talking about, attracting businesses, and I go back to, that might be an outcome, but it's not a direction, right? That might be something that happens because we're doing these other things, but to me, it should not be, right, a specific goal or direction, because that it's not. I mean, within what we're talking about, if you again think of those two pieces at a high level, that yes, outcome, or potentially an outcome, but
Right.
I don't think it should be a
driver.
driver. Right.
Right.
I agree with that.
And if everybody is comfortable, I think we remove N4. I think the tenant, the intent of it is captured in it's this idea of, what Mike was just talking about, this training of the folks today, right? It's the, using the other layers of recommendations to be able to ensure that one of the things we're working for is training current staff, those in the spaces on the most current IT and practices. And so I don't know that it's a standalone rec in the way that it's currently written, but I think there's ways that we can ensure that it's leveled through both at that goal level and that intent level in other places. So considering removing N4 as it is currently written. Does anybody have like major objection to that? Right. Okay. Now we have a longer list of long-term ones. And so, Allie, what you might do, push L1 down, like hard return it down to your next page. All right. And then start to pull your page up. And how many of these are there total?
We have 10 of the long-term, so there are just a few more further down.
Okay. All right. Let's take a moment and Allie, bring your screen down a percentage or two. See, we can get. I was trying to see if we could get any more onto screen.
It looks like I'm going down pretty
Pretty far.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
Get me to zoom back in a little bit and I can scroll down for the others.
I don't know how, can people see that?
I can read it.
Okay. I'm gonna lean into my computer so that I can read it. Let's start like this, giving us an opportunity to read through, and then Allie, I'm gonna have you make it bigger in just a minute as we start talking. So I'm gonna give everybody a minute and just refresh your memory on these real quick. Give people another minute or two. I'm making notes to myself, so as we walk through.
And I'll just jump in. These you guys will not want me to attend these anymore, I'm sure, after a while. But I mean, except for maybe which one? The L3. I mean, a lot of these seem just redundant to what we've already talked about.
Mhm. They are, but so remembering in our kind of near-term, long-term conversation, or if we organize the final report differently than near-term, long-term, I think that there's some specificity in some of the recommendations here that point a direction for some work to be done. I do think that there's some things are duplicative. But there's also some indicators for some additional work or potential areas for resource investment that for me don't come through when we talk about the near-term work.
Yeah,
No,
when
I
you
don't.
get,
Go ahead.
yeah,
Go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry. When you get into, you know, some of the like L8, L10,
Mhm.
L9. I mean, yeah, some of them that have specific ideas.
Mhm.
I think you know, that probably makes sense, but like establish public to private pathways with salaries where it makes sense.
Yep. L4 was one that I was like, I don't think it
Huh?
matches, and L10 addresses it better or differently.
Yeah.
So like L4 is one I'd recommend we probably take out.
What does L4 even mean?
Yeah.
So
I'm
it was
serious.
in the definition, the little context around it, there is a discussion about having the public-private pathway where somebody, if you know a company is hiring somebody on at the entry level, they would give them over to the state or whoever to kind of grow them at a salary they can afford, where then they transition to the private industry after like 4 years at that much higher rate. And it's kind of that cooperative agreement with the private industry. That was some of this kind of discussed. Some of the other states were kind of following some of that model.
Okay. Yeah, I think categorizing some of these would be helpful as you read through them so you don't jump around topics. But I'll just throw in a comment. 8 and 9 are two that I think are pretty timely, especially with the Board of Education allowing computer science to be counted as a high school graduation credit now. And so I know there's a lot of attention on this, and there's also a lot of emphasis through programs like Ignister and things like that of how do we help get the teachers, because a lot of high schools simply don't have the teachers with the training to teach computer science and cybersecurity. And so how do we basically retrain some of the existing high school and middle school teachers so that they can teach in these topic areas? And we're going to have that happen in order to build this pipeline. And so I know that's something that the Department of Education is working on right now, as well as several groups such as Flagship Kansas.Tech and Ignister.
And that was another exact point from the local school district, is be very cognizant of recommendations that smaller districts may not be able to jump into necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this reads, I mean, that goes straight to looking for resources.
Other thoughts? I'm processing.
Would you like me to zoom in a little bit on anything?
I think we're okay.
You know, I look at L1, I'll just keep going until you guys cut my Zoom off.
No, please do, please.
You know, I think about that and the difficulty. I mean, that's a goal that we've brought up in my other committees as well, is how do we do a better job of connecting interns and opportunities. And that's something that, again, that coordination with the universities is going to be key, since a lot of the internship matching goes through their career service offices. And so that's an outcome of that. And and then having students actually go to that site. And therefore, I think that's a great goal and one that will take some time. May give me some background or context on L2.
So there was a conversation that Senator Pittman introduced, that there's the national security corridor.
Yep.
That it was discussed partnership about just finding ways to engage in that, because that's a way to bring in a lot of resources to the state in terms of just capabilities and things like that. So just continue to explore things like that. The MBAF, where are ways to really build some of those partnerships. And even if it's not, sharing of resources, it definitely be sharing of knowledge and things like that.
Okay, thanks.
So maybe, again, in terms of refining a recommendation, if we're, with the L2, how do we strengthen that to give that nod where it doesn't need that explanation, right? To either cite examples or strengthen the language in such a way, like what we're talking about here is particularly, leaning into pre-existing collaborations and or opportunities for new ones, like the National Security Corridor, MBAF to or something. I don't know, maybe, because to me, like, I agree that, that is there, but it's, again, trying to make sure our recs don't feel too generic.
Well, and this is also where I think the grouping would be helpful. So like maybe if you had like network building, and then underneath that, you could have a short-term and a long-term goal or something like that. Because if it was under network building, then it would make sense. It would give that context, at least for me.
Mm-hmm. That's a way to think about it as we, because remember, as we do this final report, the structure that we're using doesn't have to stick. We don't just have to fill out more boxes. We have the ability to present it structurally slightly differently. So, I do like, versus like the list of like, okay, here's long-term, here's short-term. I do like having some areas or categories, even within the workforce development, that we're after, that then have both may have short and long-term within them. I don't know. I'm not trying to overly complicate or anything, right. But the list is like, you look at the long-term, there's 10 things, but there are clearly groupings of things that help towards reaching a certain type of goal, like network building or, the K-12 education group, that something like that.
Because like L5 and L7 are existing employee training.
Mm-hmm.
And to Mike's point, even simplifying like existing employee training, talent, would be some of the talent pipeline or
right.
New employees. Yeah. And then
8 and 9 are talent pipeline development.
Yeah, because I can tell you guys. So like last year, in the spring, we partnered with Joe out of Wichita State and had his class just do a social engineering attack on our water systems. And so, you know, that was just typical, right? Of we're trying to leverage those partnerships and give them real world experience. And I'm sure we're not the only ones doing stuff like that. So I guess, you know, how do you find those and make them more available and maybe connect them?
Yep. And you'd be surprised, Mike, I think that there's a cluster that might be doing them. And then I think that there's a cluster that would want to do them, but don't have the relationships or the institutions close enough or even know that they could ask to do them, right? So which speaks to, I think, Doug's point that came out of his school district, this idea of, you know, once this type of work is identifying certain types of resources or opportunities, there also has to be the component of, and then how do we raise awareness and share and operationalize, you know, in the context of some of this. So.
Yeah, it's like we talked before about, you know, what they're doing, and I think Trent brought this up, what they're doing in Kansas City, and then replicating that because it was successful, and that's really what we would do, right? I mean, just say, hey, people at KU, K-State, Fort Hays, right? We just partnered, did some MOUs. Here's what those look like.
Right.
And, you know, didn't give them any access to any classified stuff, but, right, they were still able to go through this project and learn. So, yeah, it comes back to that. How do you collaborate and how do you share, you know, on a large scale?
How do we replicate, you know, certain services, opportunities, partnerships, resources? Right? Yeah,
find the things that work and replicate them, right? Where possible.
At the federal level, on the education side, there's like they started making like this. It was a clearinghouse of. It literally was called like things that work, right? I mean, because we were using best practices and, you know, promising practices. And I'm pretty sure the last one that came out was like things that work, right? And it was literally, and they called it a clearinghouse, right? Of what works, right? But I say that, you know, like jokingly, but in some seriousness of, and I don't know if it's a full recommendation or it's just a piece of some of the things that we're talking about of how, you know, how we operationalize pieces of it. But there is this real need of, you know, once we do have these landscapes and can characterize, you know, catalog them or identify them and identify the partnerships and the resources, you know, then being able to, you know, say, here's a toolkit, a set of resources, a set of opportunities that works and that are available. But also we've had enough conversation, I think, in this group to also think about the differing types of entities. Some entities will be in a position, if you can provide those types of, you know, ideas or opportunities, they'll be ready to lean in, like Mike's group, to be like, yep, we're in. Now that we know that Wichita State can do that, we'll contact them and have them do it for our county. But then you'll have other entities that won't be in a position to even take advantage of it, even once we can bring it to the forefront as being available. So, and I say that to say that, you know, we can't be all things to everyone, but remembering as we think across this work, our recommendations, things that we're thinking about, that we're creating different types of resources that create opportunity for entities that are at different types of ability to still engage and access and grow is, yeah. Because I always worry about that smaller entity that even when we say this is available, then they don't have anyone to do that or to execute it or to engage. And that's where we talk about some of those larger, and might come out through some of the other working groups, of course, you know, some of that larger coordination. How do you leverage, you know, state resources or regional resources in a way into an area that doesn't have that individual resource? So. Other thoughts? Refinement, any other, like, anything else feeling overly generic? All right, what's missing? Do we have a gap in what we're talking about, given what we believe our priorities for this group should be, or what we're trying to hope we accomplish? Is there a gap area?
No, kind of going back to the earlier conversation about addressing the retention challenges in Kansas. I don't know if there's, creative ways to find ways to attract and retain talent. So, we kind of talk about scholarship as a service to attract talent, but is there something on kind of the backside, like a loan forgiveness program or something that we could explore to retain talent? Just trying to think of some creative ways about how do you incentivize people to stick around. Is that something a state could even do, is repay loan, student loan type things? Because I think some states do it for like teachers or things like that. I just, what are some creative ways we could do that? Because to the point, I don't think we really call out the retention problem.
We talked about it earlier through that conversation around.
And to the point of just we didn't call it out in the report more, because I know we had the discussion. I think that's critical. We probably do call it out in the report.
And maybe it is, again, this idea of pulling through, with some of the work or some of the recommendations that are in the near term, understanding the analysis, what's going on, what it looks like, with some of the things that are in the long term, you pull some of that together and what can be better leveraged or more effectively leveraged to lean into our retention needs in this area. And I don't know if that's just thinking about how we might frame a recommendation. Again, when I think about retention, I think of it as one of those higher level goals. And then what then are some concrete recommendations that help lead to that higher level goal? Because the recommendation of wanting retention or trying to create retention that's not a recommendation to me. That's a high level goal that we want to try to achieve. And then what is it that we have that are recommendations that help feed to or support retaining talent?
Mm-hmm. Allie, could you scroll down to 10, long-term 10, please? I just want to look at that one again. I think 10 could be leveraged. I noticed it was critical, and I agree with the critical, and I wonder if we can leverage that or expand that in a way that talks about really basically it's a labor analysis or a position analysis of what the jobs are and what the salaries are in the different areas across the state. And I think that would do two things. Clearly, it'd give you the information of saying, what do I have to pay in order to retain or attract talent to the state of Kansas? But I think we could also leverage that across for the private industry as well, so that they have a sense of, hey, I need to hire, or even a school district or a county saying, I need to hire someone in cybersecurity, and the county commissioners or say, we think we can budget $45,000 for that salary, when reality is you need to budget $150,000 for that salary. I think it would give everyone the information of what the true costs are. And it would also help our private sector companies understand that. And all of that in turn, then I think would make Kansas more competitive on the salary position, which would help with that attraction and retention. And the other piece of that is, as that information is released out there, students and families are going to see the salary levels for cybersecurity, and they're going to have conversations of, maybe I should go into cybersecurity for a career. So I see that salary study having a twofold benefit of better positioning organizations from a budget perspective and paying market rate salaries, but then also attracting people into the cybersecurity career field.
And I think of this coupled with, you take something like that, and then going back to our other conversation of what's working in places, whether it's here locally, regionally, or even nationally, that are innovative, out of the box ideas that help to, that based on our landscape could help with our retention. Right? But again, it's based on our landscape. But I think we have to couple kind of, again, these types of analysis with, now how do we leverage that into understanding what could work to impact our retention?
Yep.
Salaries will be a big piece of one of it, but it won't be the only, right? As Jeff mentioned,
Right.
Student loans and things like that, public service loan, loan forgiveness and things like that can be also, different type of benefit, salary type of benefit, right? Yeah. Those are, yeah. Other thoughts? I do think the retention piece has to have a clear home in here. So let's make sure we put that pin there. Any other areas you feel like we're missing?
One thought just to throw in there is I want to make sure, similar to what I think the work that they've done in Kansas City, is that we don't forget about the kind of the adult population that might be interested in retraining or new careers or those types, and maybe a 4-year degree is just not the direction that they are interested in going, or it just doesn't work for them. So I want to make sure, because I know we call out K through 12 and then higher ed, but I want to make sure we don't miss those folks, because that I think is a really large potential.
Yeah. That idea of an adult workforce that is retraining, retooling.
Right.
Yeah, we do an apprentice program actually that focuses on this as well, for those that don't have that bachelor degree, and focusing on those that want to gain that experience as well.
Yeah, there's some models out there. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I can share the model that we have if you guys are interested.
Yeah, let's drop it with our rest of our resources. I like that. Adult workforce.
I know this is more tactical, but working with transitioning soldiers and helping them understand with training and getting them into the cybersecurity workforce. A lot of them have already security clearances. A lot of them have been exposed to cybersecurity, but they're not practitioners. And with the transitioning soldier programs where you can engage them 6 months before separation, you can almost do that internship or some of that training process before they even separate from the military. And, we've all heard of the numbers, but I mean, I live in Manhattan, Fort Riley's right next door. That's 200 to 300 service members a month separating. And you think of that talent pipeline as maybe something we should focus on.
Yeah, and Trent, that was something that Joe out at Wichita State, he's worked at McConnell.
Yep.
And he mentioned that was a really good opportunity if we could tie into they have a liaison, that's what they do, is they manage those guys coming out of the service, and that there's a 6-month period there that's actually paid by the federal government, that they could work, as in cyber or whatever it is, right? But
Correct.
yeah, that's also an available pipeline.
And I think that, almost speaks to what we were talking about earlier of like thinking about if we're categorizing, different areas of our recommendations, right? And so under this, pipeline development, it's not just K through 12 or higher ed, it is what are those other, pipeline partnerships or opportunities that are maybe considered non-traditional, right? Actually exploring that. Because I think when you stand it up under that header, it doesn't feel like a standalone kind of generic recommendation. It's more like coupling, right? Now we're talking, like we were talking about network building, we were talking about, pipeline, we're talking about retention, right? And then underneath there's some specificity of opportunities like these. Because I like being able to call out some of that. Otherwise, some of our recs continue to feel generic. I'm going to use that word because that when I reread them, I was like, oh, I know what we meant. And yeah, we need to do that. But I'm like, but what does this actually say, right?
So would it make sense to have almost a section just on opportunities specifically? Calling out kind of just some of the in more general language that there's the opportunities for, the soldiers.
I don't know that that's how I see it.
Okay.
It's not that. This isn't just like a random opportunity. So when you think about, again, if you think about sets of our recommendations think about it from like a high level goal perspective, and then our recommendation are almost the how do we get to the high level goal, right? The high level goal or the high level, target is this idea for this one of this pipelining, right? Or creating, deep pipelines and new avenues to bolster our cybersecurity workforce. And there are a number of recommendations under here, near term and long term, that help us get there. And the couple that we threw out would be additional ones under that category.
Gotcha.
Right. But then like when we were talking retention, that higher level goal was this idea of how do we retain and be able to, deepen, the resources that are already in the state, for this sector. And that could be, that's the doubling down of like, the workforce trainings and, things and the salaries and things like that, because that's those recommendations that are about truly, reinvesting in or strengthening the existing workforce in various ways, versus say another bundle of our recommendations that was truly around kind of network building. And now this might be in this bucket of like network building and what works clearinghouse, but we don't say that, or like, the sharing of opportunities that work is another bundle. Those are some of my initial thoughts after talking through our various, it makes some of our recs feel less generic or less not tied to something or just kind of out there, because they're tied to a large, like these are in an effort to achieve this larger goal. All right, we have 11 minutes left. This has been, at least for me, and I hope for the whole group, really, really good, strong conversation. Very helpful as we put, the different things together. Jeff and I have already talked about that in some part of this report, and I think it came up last week when we were with the big group, there has to be a section where we give some acknowledgement or just a call out to some of the work, Trent, so like, the work that you guys are doing, whether it's the Advantage Kansas Coordinating Council or like you were mentioning the University Engineering Act, the things that we have come across that we know are working in parallel or, with the goals that we're trying to achieve. We're not going to capture them all and we're not trying to list them in detail, but we need to acknowledge in this report that it is key and critical as, we move forward in some of these areas of exploring these recommendations to be looking to those partners where our recommendations and their recommendations are aligning in parallel to see where we can combine resources and efforts and knowledge to be able to advance these goals together. So like this acknowledgement that some of this work is happening around us as well, and we need to tap that. And I know we get that through the landscape analysis, but to me, this is different. There are like entities that are already doing pieces of it, or that we're all bringing recommendations for it together. And when you acknowledge that in the push of this report, it's this idea of ensuring that, we're going out there as we start to take these steps to say who else is doing this and where do we align. And that's bigger than the workforce development section. That to me is kind of across the larger report that we're putting together. So, any other final thoughts, things for us to consider? The team is going to write this up and play with it a little bit, recirculate it back to the group. And then again, it'll start to push into the larger. So we still have a few weeks to play with this. And we'll have the large, big group kind of walk through as well. So there's still time for feedback. I just want to make sure we capture anything today as we start to clean this up and push it back out to you all to digest and make sure it's reflective of our conversation. Any final thoughts? Mike, did we lose Doug? Looks like we might have lost Doug. No, are you still there? Oh, there he is. Doug, I see you. Mike or Doug, any final thoughts?
Not for me.
It's covered most of the things I can think of offhand today.
Perfect. Trent, any other things come to mind? Or if there are things that you want to pass to us as we're starting to shape that in, make sure you're passing it in. But any final thoughts?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to participate today and all the work that you've done. Really, it's a heavy lift, and so I appreciate your efforts.
No, likewise, we appreciate the efforts that are ongoing and that you guys are working in, because it really is going to take the lift of various aspects to make this whole of state stronger and have that hardening stance. So thank you too. Jeff and Allie, any other pieces, where either programmatically or operationally? Jeff, I'll start with you and then we'll kick to Allie.
Yeah, we kind of did have that, just kind of maybe an additional recommendation in terms of, because we had Dr. Vasserman talking about how his students have stood up a cyber range and would love the opportunity to kind of broaden its capabilities, but maybe something more in terms of that public-private partnership between the regents and private industry to establish a range for the state of Kansas, or just all levels of government and even private industry, and developing some sort of partnership like that.
So maybe a recommendation specifically around the development of a public-private cyber range.
Yeah.
And yeah. Trent, wasn't something similar to that in one of your?
That was in the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence report. The cyber range development was one of the key proposals. And that is an area that we continue to explore for resources to develop that range. But I think, Jeff, pulling a group together to work on that, because as you know, there's different models of cyber ranges. There's some that you buy that are the virtual, they're not even hosted in the state, or are we trying to develop our own cyber range at a physical location in the state of Kansas that then has the ability for users around the state to participate? If we could flesh that model out quickly, I think that would be beneficial, given that the possibility of resources coming forward to help establish a cyber range, maybe pending in the next few weeks even.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the discussion, because I think some of the Regents institutions would love the opportunity to, as a training opportunity for their students to manage something like that. Yep. And I think that was kind of where Dr. Vasserman was kind of going with that, because that's definitely kind of that professional development for them and getting their hands on things as well. So
yeah, that would be one of those instances where I really think that collaboration, and sometimes, and D'Angela, you know this, sometimes it's very difficult to get especially the large three to collaborate on anything. But I think that would be one of those instances where, it just makes so much sense, and would show that, that we have a collaborative environment and efforts, right, that bring that whole of state approach, and not just the big three, right? It's some would say maybe the big two, and then the little brother down here in Wichita. But Fort Hays, I mean, there's a lot of institutions here in Kansas, and a lot of them are starting to delve into the cybersecurity side. So I think if we could pull something like that off, that alone would be a tremendous starting point, right? Just the willingness, right, to share and cooperate in a venture like that would be a huge step, in my opinion.
So Jeff, can I ask for you and Trent maybe to try to draft up something? And I know in the state of this report, it'll probably be a little bit more broader, but like just that idea or concept, so that we can drop it in there. But it was one of those things that I'd make sure, however we're designated in the final report, it has more of a near-term nod, knowing that there's some real potential to get some collaboration and potential dollars leveraged into this in the more near term that weren't there, to be honest, 6 months ago, but now are presenting themselves. And so, in this report, it might feel or sound a little bit generic, and maybe it gives a nod to the work that Commerce has already done. But if you don't mind, and then we can add it to the notes that are updated from this, and then people can react to it if we need to tweak that language. But I'd like to go ahead and drop that in.
And like I said, I mean, it was just something that's kind of came up in conversation. I know we've talked about it a little bit, and it's just, I think there is a nod and there's an appetite at multiple levels for something like that. I'd love it for my staff to have the opportunity to go play in an environment like that, train agencies to respond to incidents and stuff. And there's appetite for folks that want to manage it and learn from it as well. So, I seeing some of the synergies there, and definitely think it's worth a nod. So.
Got it. We lost Mike, but as always, thanks to him just for hopping in. As one of the other co-chairs, even though he isn't assigned to this committee, he's joined and been a good partner and thought partner as well. So, Allie, any operational things to wrap us up?
No, I'm going to work on getting this turned around pretty quickly. So that way, since we do have that time before the full task force meets, that way everyone here has a chance to reflect on what we've talked about, make sure that I've captured everything in the way that this group wants to see it then discussed with the full task force. We also received a little bit of feedback from Dr. Wasserman just around some fine tuning of some of the recommendations. And I think getting to some of the points that came up here today in the conversation, if they need explaining, then what do they really mean? So just making sure we're a little bit better about that, cleaning some of that up and some of the recommendations. So I'll incorporate that into what I circulate back with the group.
Sounds great. Lastly, in our last 2 minutes, I just want to say thank you to all of you who served on this subcommittee. And, on the committee as a whole, we're not quite done, but as a subcommittee, we're done meeting. And I just want to thank you and applaud the effort that you all have put in, the thought that you've put into us really thinking through this work. I know that when we started this process, and Jeff, Allie, and I, and others, as we started to design this, and we said we think the subcommittees will be the way to go, so that we can, because there was so much we know we needed to cover, and we knew there would be overlap and things of that nature. But it has worked to help us do a lot of work in a short period of time because of your contributions. For those who are sitting members on this committee, but also for partners like Trent and all those, that have come to visit us from the various institutions and organizations and shared the work in this space with us. And so I just want to give just a sincere thanks to all of our speakers, all of our partners, all of internal to the state and external as well, our national partners that have been here and part of these conversations, local partners as well, but to the committee members, subcommittee members, and to the team that are helping to move this along. We couldn't do this work in these subcommittees so fast if it wasn't for the work that Ali helps to lead and put together and Jeff then leans into. So thank you to everyone. Great work. We're almost there, but we got a little bit more to do. So I appreciate it. And I probably won't talk to you before next week. So please have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. Talk to you all soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everybody.